Good morning. It is Monday, October the 21st, in the eventful year of 2024. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Lots going on. There's always a lot going on, but this time there's really a lot going on. We're 15 days out from Election 24, which is going to be, I predict, an interesting 2 weeks, and I predict things are going to get even more interesting after November the 5th. Meanwhile, America continues its, how do I explain this? I have many listeners from around the world, in Europe, South Africa, a few in India, the Far East, even a couple in South America. And I'm going to explain this to everybody overseas and remind the people in this country something is Americans really go nuts around elections most of the time. I mean, if you see our history, we love to wear banners, we take it all seriously, and probably more seriously than they should, but this time around there is a lot at stake given the position of the U.S. in the world and currently what's slipping. It's been said by many other leaders over the decades that they should have a say in who becomes president because it directly affects them. And I don't think they're altogether wrong on that. Let's go into what's been going on. First off, the big story currently is Donald Trump frying French fries at McDonald's. Now, Americans traditionally get very hokey at election time. Back in the day, the joke was you got to go out and shake hands and kiss babies. Well, kissing babies has kind of fallen out of favor, at least in public with some candidates, and I won't go into details at this point. But the whole idea was to humble yourself in front of the people you are supposed to lead. This has been something that's been dating back a long time. It goes back to ancient Rome. If you wanted to run for public office, you would put on a white toga and you'd powder it so it would even be more white, and you'd go out to the forum and talk to the plebes and humble yourself in front of the people to show that you're a decent person. Even though you were an elite, you still had to humble yourself. And that's what Trump was doing. It was a photo op. It was designed to be a little hokey, but that was refreshing. But to see the other side of the political fence screaming about it was just nuts. This is something that just underscores what we know about where so-called liberal America has gone. It's not American anymore. And if you know anything about history, it looks, smells, and acts an awful lot like Stalinist Russia, or more likely Leninist Russia. These people really are un-American, really. So what? He's going to McDonald's and frying up French fries, which probably was more fun he's had than he's had in a while. So what? People do stuff like that. Calvin Coolidge put on a war bonnet when he went to go meet American Indians. I mean, there's all sorts of people in this country, and you got to cater to all of them if you're in charge. At least that was the tradition. And that leads us to another terrible gaffe that Kamala Harris, or Camilla Harris, or whatever name she's pronouncing it now. I saw an interview with her where she was faking a Jamaican accent, which I found rather... I don't know how I found it. It was just so weird. It's like a surreal 80s slasher movie. It's just too much. But the Fox interview this lady did was a total disaster. And it just shows how incapable she's able to answer questions, think, or act on her feet. And that comes with the job. You have to give some answers to what questions you get, and she didn't really do much of that. It was a real catastrophe, even for her. But the bigger one that I think historically might be what will be said was what really cost her the election is not showing up at the Al Smith dinner in New York. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this custom in American presidential politics, especially if you're overseas. This is a Roman Catholic charity event that is put on just before the election every 4 years. And it's designed to raise money for Catholic charities. It's the Roman Catholic vote in this country, whether you are a flaming atheist, an opposing Christian sect, or a dedicated pagan that wants nothing to do with anything from the Abrahamic tradition, doesn't matter. You got to go to this thing. And it serves several purposes. One is it caters to a very large voting bloc in the United States. The other is it's always done with humor. It's a roast, as we call it here. You basically make fun of your opponents, and they make fun of you, and you make fun of yourself a little bit. And it's designed to tone things down. The Al Smith dinner is designed to kind of cool things off a little bit because they can get heated. When you're dealing with power, especially the power to control a superpower militarily and economically, and the U.S. is still in that category, you do want people who don't take themselves all that seriously. It's the American custom of putting on the white toga and hanging out at the forum and being just one of the people. Kamala Harris skipped this. She sent a video, which was viewed by many people there. It's designed to kind of just go back to being Americans again, and she just spit on it. Now, the last person who did that was Walter Mondale in 1984, when he was running against Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was running for re-election, and Walter Mondale had been vice president under Jimmy Carter. He had been a senator, most famous for trying to stop the Apollo program from landing on the moon, but that's another story. But he didn't go to that event in that year. And what happened? Well, Trump pointed that out. During election 84, Walter Mondale won the District of Columbia and his home state of Minnesota. Every other state went to Reagan. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this time, considering that California is a one-party state, and a lot of others are as well, but it just shows how much of an important event this is, because that probably turned what was left of the old establishment against her. And it was some of the funnier jokes Trump gave was that, I don't even call it an organization, a group of white males called White Men for Harris, and the joke was he doesn't care because all of their wives and their wives' lovers are voting for him anyway, and that was that was a good one, I'll tell you. This is an important ritual that the Roman Catholic Church puts on to their credit to make things more civilized. But what we're dealing with on the other side of the fence in this country, what is really more Marxist than anything, is uncivilized. So that being said, we're counting down now, as I said, 15 days until we have the election, or I should say it's a horse race to determine will America have a fair election or another rigged one. And yes, I am one of those people who's quite certain that 2020 was rigged. The difference is everyone was taken by surprise because most people thought that this was a country that played by its own rules, and it clearly didn't at that time. And I know of quite a few people who volunteered to be monitors at election polling stations. I won't be one of them this year, but there are a lot of people out there that are going to do that. This election is going to be watched like a hawk. Given the polls, given how incompetent this lady has demonstrated herself to be, how phony, nobody, even the supporters of her, are going to believe that the election was fair if suddenly they stop counting the votes for a few hours in a few key states and there's a few 100,000 more than they thought there'd be. No one's going to buy that happening. I don't know what else to say. There's already a lot of reports. There are already many reports of irregularities in various locations. I'll let you go research that for yourself. Now, speaking of which, there's another story out there, and I'm going to dedicate much of today's report to straightening out a lot of misreporting, and not just on the leftist side of things. The rightist side is doing its share of nonsense. This is the American inability to research basic facts, in spite of the fact that we have the internet. And I learned to do journalism back in the days when all we had was filing cabinets, a Rolodex, and a telephone to call someone who knew what they were talking about. People don't do rudimentary research. One of the stories is about voting ID in California, and I'm going to go into some details on this because you can't have a country that's not moral with the structure the United States has. But let's go into this. Now, everyone's talking about in California it's illegal to ask for IDs at the polling stations and when the people come to vote. Sort of. Now, what we're talking about is a law signed by the California governor in September called Senate Bill 1174, and you can read it yourself if you go to legislature.ca.gov. And that's what people don't really do. Now, to their credit, California knows how to write laws that are easy to read. A lot of states don't do that, really, but California is a mess, and people assume that everything coming out of there is a mess, and it is sometimes. But basically, it's just designed to shore up laws they already have on the books, and it's not what a lot of people are saying. Now, sure, you don't ask for ID when people vote, but you're supposed to ask for ID when they register. Unfortunately, IDs are going to illegal immigrants. This is the whole problem. If the United States just stayed to its sane laws of not allowing people into the country that aren't supposed to be here, not allowing people to vote who aren't citizens, but we don't do that. But I did go through the law. There's no provision for punishment in that law that I saw. There might be some reference to it because I'm not too familiar with how they set up their website, but I didn't see any poll watcher would be going to, or poll worker would be going to jail if they asked for an ID. You're not supposed to ask for it. Now, to be fair, throughout most of American history, you didn't ask for ID when you went to vote. You showed that you were a resident. You made a statement that you were a citizen when you registered, but I remember as a young child, and when I went to vote, when I was very young, they didn't ask for ID either because there was too many people in line. We didn't have election seasons, and we're not really supposed to. We had an election day, the first Tuesday in November. That's election day. But because everything has gotten so complicated, because people are too busy and frankly too lazy, we have seasons now. Back in the day, the polls would be open at 6 a.m. or something to that effect, and they'd close about 8, depending on where you were. And people would take time off of work. They'd be given time off from work. They'd get up real early to go vote before work. It would have been a good idea if we had had that as a national holiday, and then people would have all the time in the world. But no. So we now have this seasonal thing, which is not a great idea. In fact, it's an unconstitutional idea if anyone wants to contend it. But I went through this law, and it was not what a lot of the right-wing people are reporting either. Now, granted, if you do not have requirement to show ID when you vote, there's a room for a lot of fraud. This is a country that didn't used to have to worry about that, but because of the way we've done things in the last several decades, we now do. And my understanding would be that back in the day when you had so many people in line on their way to get to work, it wouldn't make any sense. You walked up, there was a big sheet of paper that the person had in front of them on a table, said, "What's your name and address?" And you give your name and address, and they would put a ruler, cross it out, and send you over to a machine. We've also used technology, counter to what an awful lot of people have been saying. The first machine I voted on was called the Gillespie voting machine, which some of you might remember. It was that big green thing with the lever. Remember, pull the lever and vote, and there was a curtain that would close in back of you. Those things, I did some research on that. They were patented in 1898, and they were manufactured well into the 1960s. The first machine I used was one of those when I voted for the first time in 1980. In 1976, at a high school, when I was in high school, they they had a mock election where we used the Gillespie machine. Very often these would be stored at schools, and I remember a few times being able to examine these things because they were in a storeroom in the back, and I was a mischievous kid, and I would go back and check these things out, and I thought they were pretty cool. But we always used these machines because they allowed, they were very well regulated, and they'd be able to just take off the back, and you'd print what the numbers were, and you'd know what the tolls were. It was a pretty fast system. The idea was to get the answers as quickly as possible. But the biggest problem we have is that it's quite obvious that the way this law was written in California, even though it looks pretty sane, it would be sane if this was a country of civilized, law-abiding people, especially in government. But it's going to make it easier for anybody to walk in and claim to be someone else and vote. But the thing is, you have to show ID in California to register to vote. That's a fact. Sorry, those of you out there that are not fans of California, neither am I, but still, that's the reality of it. Now, another thing that has been coming out in the last few days, which a lot of people are getting upset about, is President Yi of China is talking about his military has to prepare for war. Okay, let's do some research on that. It was done at a local meeting of people of a particular military unit. And guess what? He said the same thing back in early 2023 in an edition of Foreign Affairs I dug up. This is what you say when you go to meet your military. And you say, always be ready for war. You're not going to say, hey, guys, don't worry about it. Just chill. No, you don't say that to soldiers when they're assembling with their commander-in-chief. Now, one of the things that's always bothered me is Americans are woefully ignorant of how the rest of the world operates and who makes up the rest of the world, which is why we get pulled into things like the Middle East conflict, which I'll go into in a minute. And we really don't know what we're talking about. I lived in the Far East for nearly 30 years, and if you can describe the Chinese as anything, as eminently practical. I don't think they want to go to war. I think they're far more practical than that. I don't think they want to be pushed around, and I think they're tired of the nonsense the U.S. is putting out. Again, I don't think the rest of the world hates the U.S. for its freedoms. I think the rest of the world has gotten to be sick of the U.S. for its stupidity, because they used to really like us and respect us. Not necessarily at the same time. When the Cold War ended, we didn't rebuild Russia. We should have. Instead, we decided to kick them in the gutter. So everyone's tired of the U.S. right now. China makes too much money and is doing what it can to build up a middle class. That's actually part of their strategy, you know. They want a strong middle class because they know that stabilizes a country. And in the U.S., we're getting rid of our middle class. Does it exist anymore? So I'm just going to point this out. I have looked into that. I don't read much into that. I think it's being misinterpreted. And again, it's election season, so, oh my goodness, the Chinese are going to go to war with us. What are we going to do? Vote for Trump. Or some people might think to vote for Harris. No, I don't. I think more is being read into that than a lot of people are capable of understanding. It's a bit distressing. It's a bit distressing, people, let me tell you. No, I would urge. I was last in China for a month in 2016, and I was very, very encouraged at how decent the people were I was with, and I had actually met a vice cabinet minister, and I also met a lot of the average people on the street. I have a great deal of respect for East Asian civilization, having seen it up close and gotten to know it. I have a great deal of respect for all nations and their cultures. I might not agree with it, might not want to live with it, but hey, man, we're all on the same planet. We're going to have to start knowing what our neighbors are about. Now let's go on to the next thing, and this is what I'm calling the Israeli-Ukraine military conflict dynamic. Israel has far too much influence over the United States government at present. Way too much. Used to be the other way around. If you read the writings of Nixon and all these others, I mean, everyone's waiting for the other shoe to drop in the Middle East. And if you understand the cultural significance of throwing your shoes at somebody in that part of the world, you would probably take it as a pun. Israel is supposed to be hitting Iran. The Israelis have a term for this thing, by the way. It's called mowing the lawn. You just, every so often you hit back, and then you go back and mow the grass. It grows back. You mow it down again. It's never ending. And this is all about religion. It's all about Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and if you really want to be serious about it, Marxism mixed in there as well. And until these religions cease being fanatical, it's going to continue on. I don't think there is going to be anything resembling peace for a very long time in that part of the world, especially after what's gone on in the last year. You know, think about it. They were very close to having diplomatic relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That would have changed the whole dynamic. But this is all connected because Iran and Russia are quite close. They're effectively allies. North Korea has sent troops into the Ukrainian-Russian military theater. Exactly what role they're playing is a bit vague, but you have North Korea now tied very closely with Russia. When Trump was in office, he was courting them, and that would have probably led to better things. Now they have no incentive of negotiating with the United States. China is exerting its force over Taiwan. I don't believe they want to invade it. It wouldn't be an easy thing to do, if even possible. But they want it back, and they want it back under favorable terms. We have the formula for what could be World War III. Could be. And the reason it's gone this far is because of incompetent management on the part of the United States and, frankly, many European countries. And this incompetence, though, goes back many, many, many years. It goes back to the late 80s, early 90s. Actually, the early 90s. It started with the end of the Soviet Union and was not handled right. So where does that leave us today? Well, in a little more than 2 weeks, we'll know what course the United States is going to take. But the one thing that's absolutely certain is that it has lost all the credibility it built up during World War II and after it. That's all gone, folks. Like it or not, that's gone. We're no longer the military superpower we think we are. And those who are in power who think, hey, here's a chance for another war we can use to make a lot of money, they're also quite mistaken. The world is not the same place it was. The U.S. is not the military power it used to be. I don't think China and Russia want to go to war with the United States. I think they just want to build their economies and build their countries. They probably want to see us gone from the scene, but for many, many years, they wanted to see North Korea gone from the scene. In spite of what people think, China doesn't like North Korea. I don't think Russia does either. It's just useful. It's just everyone wanted it to vanish, but nobody wanted to pay the price to make it vanish, which would be quite expensive. When this election's over, and I am predicting Trump is going to win because it's really going to be too hard to hide election fraud this time around, the most important thing the U.S. can do is revert back to sanity and dignity. Those two things, sanity and dignity. No more men and women's sports. No more people identifying as cats or deer or something else. The education system, the Department of Education being eradicated, was the worst thing that Jimmy Carter did, and that says something. Everybody just going back to living decently and trying to figure out problems, but most important, realizing that we are on one planet. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy talked about something, and it was a speech that was extremely, I think, empowering. Because the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was not as bad as what we're dealing with now in many respects, really scared the bejesus out of the Russians, the Americans, just about everyone else in the world in government leadership positions. I'm not going to repeat the entire speech, but I will explain a few words from it. We all breathe the same air. We all value our children's future, and we are all mortal. He could have easily added to that, we're also all imperfect. And there is nothing more imperfect than what we're seeing in the United States right now. So, between now and the end of January, the American people are going to have a choice. And that is a choice of going down the path that we were always intended to be, of a dignified, sane country that serves as an example to the rest of the world, or head further into the abyss of insanity, barbarism, craziness, and a darkness from which we would never return. The choice is up to us. That's it for today. If you like what you hear, or I should say, if you value these reports, none of us don't like what we hear these days, please consider a paid subscription. That will be very, very helpful, especially given some plans I have for the Aurelian Column, which I will explain later on in another broadcast. I welcome feedback and questions and suggestions. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. Apologies if I can't answer everybody who sends a note in. I get too many. You can also reach me up on X. X, yes, that's Mr. Elon Musk's platform. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm up on a few social media sites. I am not up on Facebook, and I will never, ever, ever go back there again. This podcast and other writing I do, including my essays, poetry, and other such things, and photographs, that originates at Substack. My address at Substack is aureliancolumn.substack.com. That's aureliancolumn.substack.com. And that's it for today. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World must be destroyed. Good day.